Time for Chapter 2 and the beginning of the Reed family's exciting tale. Thanks for stopping by. As Renee drove up the mountain, she felt both excitement and embarrassment. She couldn't believe she would go to these women for help, but she was also terrified not to go. She just had to know. She had to talk to her son. She had to know he was at peace and had forgiven her for not giving him a better life. Her embarrassment stemmed from the strict upbringing she'd had in a Pentecostal church. Their doctrine was straight and narrow, suffer a witch not to live. But there she was, seeking out counsel from the mountain witches. Rural homes surrounded by farmland dotted the landscape. Neighbors could see other neighbors over the heads of their livestock. The gardens grew to perfection. Renee knew she was moving farther into the hills when the board fences turned to barbed wire and posts leaning precariously from side to side. Each parcel of land was an oasis. Each one was a world contained within rusty, broken borders. Everyone knew exactly where to find the Cox family. However, no one ever dared to go. Old wives' tales and stories told by terrified teens on a mission had led to everyone knowing exactly which places to avoid. Hell loomed before anyone who sought the mountain witches out. Renee drove with barely a glance to the left or right. Her destination was marked by many a night speeding through this same stretch of road. Many had always wanted to have an experience here, but never did. No one had ever really believed that they would. Renee drew in a deep breath and made a right-hand turn at the fork in the road. The width of the road was barely enough for a single car to pass. There was no dead-end sign to mark the inevitable end of real estate. Instead, the road made its way directly to the front yard of the Cox house. An elderly lady hoed at the weeds in her flower bed. Another sat in a rocking chair on the porch. She seemed to be evaluating the work the other was doing. Neither looked up at Renee's car, even though she was sure it was rare for them to receive guests. Renee threw her car into park and shut off the engine. She glanced around the yard to make sure they had no canine companion. Then she slowly exited the vehicle. She moved to the front of her car and called out to the residents. "Miss Cox?" The women looked from one to the other, and the rocking chair dweller raised her hand. Then with emotion, she directed Renee to come closer. "Come on up here, let us see ya." She gestured to her, and Renee slowly moved closer. She stood in the yard at the foot of the steps and smiled politely at the gentle-looking ladies. The gardener Cox leaned her hoe against a porch post and joined her companion on the matching rocking chair. The chairs were well loved. When referring to something that had outlived its purpose, Renee's mother would say that. The smell of honeysuckle filled her senses. It was comforting and familiar. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if I might talk to you about—" Renee stammered to find the words and decided to spit them out. "About my son." It flew from her mouth like a viper's tongue, and she knew there was no going back now. "You from round these parts?" the rocking chair Cox asked, totally ignoring Renee's comment. Renee knew exactly how the older generation did business. This particular age group had to know one's lineage at least 3 generations back. Renee politely answered, "Yes, ma'am, my name is Renee James. My people were the Reed family. My daddy was Robert Reed. Did you ever know him? He has passed now." She looked at them with a clear understanding that they never knew her daddy. Then she continued, "His daddy was Henry Reed." "Yeah, now that name rings a bell. They called him Dewey, didn't they?" This recollection caused the gardener Cox to lean forward in her chair. Renee's visit seemed to have piqued her interest now. "Yes, ma'am," Renee answered, thinking to herself that these women must be a lot older than she thought. They clearly knew her grandpa, but not her daddy. Her father had been 76 when he passed, and that was 5 years ago. "You said you had a question about your boy. Let me just get right to it." Rocking chair Cox rose from her seat and took Renee's hand in hers. She patted the top with her free hand like a mother consoling a child. Renee couldn't help but think how soft her skin was and how fragile the structure beneath was. "If you have come seeking conversation with your child, we don't do that. Not that we can't, mind you, but we have found that the path has many false spirits. These spirits will, how should I say, jump the line and try to play the part of the departed. See, they only do this for mischief, but the impact on the living is real. Even if they say they are fine and happy, the search for the next conversation will be never-ending. There is never that last word you wish to speak to a loved one. People tend to seek them out to connect like death never separated them. I must say, young lady, that the spirit world is vast and your day of reconciliation will come. You will speak to him again, only not in this life. You must wait your turn to see him again. She released Rene's hand and returned to her seat. This speech seemed to be one she had given before. It almost seemed rehearsed. Broken-hearted people would come from miles around to seek relief from the constant pain of loss, only to find that no relief existed at all. As she returned to her seat, Gardner Cox rang in. No comfort will come from speaking to an imposter anyway. The defeat and pain must have been evident on Rene's face. To her surprise, the two sat in silence, just looking at each other. She started to feel very uncomfortable. It was like she was in the room while a conversation was taking place, but the conversation was all about her. They communicated without a sound. After the long, uncomfortable silence, the first words were from Miss Cox. "This one is different, Martha. Take her hand." Rene now knew that Martha was the gardener's name, and Martha did just as her companion suggested. She rose and gently held Rene's hand in hers for the briefest of moments. Then she released it and returned to the battered cushion of her chair. "I don't feel no pain in you, girl. I feel fear. Why is that?" Martha tilted her head to the side as if she was trying to make out an odd painting she didn't quite understand. She said this with no judgment, only love and acceptance. Rene wiped a tear from her cheek and tried to explain her immense fear to the best of her ability. "It really is about my son. It started that way, and then it turned into something ugly, something irrational. I fear for my daughter to the point of despair. I really don't know what to tell you other than that. I guess I thought I could find comfort if I knew he was still out there somewhere, so that if something devastating were to befall my daughter, she would still be with me in some small way. I'm ruining her life, I know I am." Her tears flowed freely now, and she had nothing left to say. "We know your people, Rene. We have dealt with you over the years many times. You all have always been fair in dealing with us. We feel we owe you for the sin we placed on your kin." Martha sat quietly, picking at a string on the front of her worn shirt. Rene scrunched her brows in question, hoping she would continue. "Many years ago, I won't say just how long, one of your kin came to us with a similar request. We were a little cocky at that time and thought nothing was beyond our capabilities. We were wrong. A grieving mother, much as yourself, wanted to speak with her son who had recently drowned in the river over there. She pointed through the heavily wooded area to her left. All she wanted to do was talk to him. She wanted to make sure he was indeed in a better place. But we thought we could do better." A smug laugh escaped her lined lips. She never looked up from her lap. The two were like two halves of one whole. Martha picked up the story and finished the sentences with ease. "There was another of us Cox girls at that time. Her name was Ellen. She was the youngest of us. She was such a good girl. Unfortunately, that turned out to be her downfall in the end." She swiped at an unseen irritant flying near her face. "Now you see, that's important for you to know, girl. The tragedy didn't just happen to your family, but carried over into ours." Then the story switched narrators again and continued. "We discussed how sad Mrs. Reed had been and how we believed our power reached even past the bounds of death. Even though we did exactly what we set out to do, it wasn't anything any of us wanted." Silence followed, and Rene wondered when the next storyteller would begin. She held her tongue, and with much respect, she sat attentively. "See, we explained that not only did we believe that we could connect her with her boy, but that we could also bring him forth to the living again. She was entirely in our grasp. We wanted to experiment with our powers. We used her son and her grief as a board upon which to bounce our abilities. She couldn't contain her excitement. In our defense, we explained that we couldn't guarantee it would work, or the consequences in the event that it did. It didn't matter to her in the least. All she could think was her son Marcus returning to her. She didn't think it through, and honestly, neither did we." The conversation continued in this back-and-forth manner, like recollections of this memory came from the depths of one mind. We chose to do the procedure on the following Sabbath, and the days couldn't go by fast enough. Pride cometh before a fall, they say, and yes, it does. The evening came and we gathered right there. Martha pointed to a spot in the yard where a kettle hung on the braces. We filled the pot with herbs and soil and various other items we deemed necessary to reanimate a corpse. We had no idea why we thought we could do it, but it seemed to work with ailing stock and dying plants in our garden. The only thing we didn't consider was that these things were near death, not past the veil altogether. No life's blood had flowed through those veins in 3 weeks and 2 days. His body lay peacefully in the family cemetery up on Boone Road. She pointed to the right up the hill. Rene nodded, knowing exactly where it was. It didn't occur to her at the time, but that graveyard was in terrible shape. Grass grew up around the stones, and some stones lay broken and flat on the ground. She couldn't believe someone would bury a 17-year-old boy in such a rough place. She knew that the passage of time wasn't a cause in this particular tale. The area was one of use, and nothing was strange about laying the boy in the presence of his recently departed relatives. The boy's mother joined us with items the boy prized. She brought a shirt that seemed as though he had just taken it from his back. These elements joined the brew we concocted, and we began our unholy chant to darkness. As one would imagine, the wind began to whip, and the fire raged around the kettle. We chanted until the wee hours of the morning. The only signs of success were the onset of the wind and the blue flames licking our brew. Finally, we decided we would send Mrs. Reed home. We assured her we would retrieve her in the morning and tell her any news. The sun broke through the barrier of the treetops. The fire jumped once from the confinement of the circle and died. We knew something had happened, and this left us with nothing but pride and astonishment at the depths of our power. We walked through the woods, over the hill to the resting place of the boy. The very air seemed still and stagnant. No life was present other than our own. We made our way to the freshly covered mound and invoked more magic. The magic we didn't understand. We called upon the very essence of nature to undo what nature itself had done. It might seem anticlimactic, but this is the truth. We could hear scratching. Noises were coming from within the grave. Most would have been terrified, but we were excited. With a great burst of combined energy, we moved the earth from the mound with our minds to gaze upon the freshly hewed wood of the casket. The scratches turned to pounds. We lifted the unholy bed from the ground with but a flick of our hands. The top leaped from its frame, leaving broken nails in its wake. The boy jumped to his feet with no flourish or supernatural air and stared at us through milky, flat orbs, the orbs that once housed beautiful blue windows to his soul. The absence of the blue was also the absence of the soul. The funeral clothes were dirty and damp from his earthen nap. They hung on his disproportioned frame. Death had expanded its structure in some areas and collapsed it in others. Death had made his body seem wrong. His mouth opened to expose a blackened hole. His teeth were only visible through a slimy black glaze that dripped from the corners of his frowning mouth. He cocked his head from side to side and grew silent. The groans and whines ceased in order to hear what he could no longer see. His nose was raised and smelling, the senses alive by the lack of the actual eyes to see. We stood in silence, looking at the abomination we had brought forth from the pits of the vale of death. No peace would be granted to his mother by this monster. There were no words of comfort to be spoken by it. Its blackened, voided mouth held no coherent thought. We agreed grief was better. But then the question was, how do you kill something that doesn't live? Clearly, this thing housed no life. We could never allow his mother to see the abomination that was before us. We had agreed that if anything were amiss, we would tell her that the magic bore no results. The actual results were clearly beyond anything we could have dreamed. Ellen's skirts rustled as she moved closer to me, only by an inch, mind you. This thing's attention was immediately drawn to her. With wobbly, unstable steps, he moved toward her. He stretched out his hands to guide his way. He made a terrible screeching sound, like a pig in a poke. She drew near me and tried to do a basic protection circle. We had done it many times to ward off animals meant to do us harm. He moved forward, spilling black bile from his mouth. The spell did not affect him at all. He grasped open air in hopes of obtaining his target. His wails sounded miserable. His voice was mute of any coherent words, only the constant pain of a creature not meant to walk the earth. We stumbled back, making our way to the gate, which seemed to be a mile away. No one broke and ran, but I must admit that it did cross my mind. His steps led him to stumble, and his head and limbs cracked across the markers of those who truly knew peace. He simply regained his footing and moved forward. As we reached the exit, we slammed it shut. We moved back, awaiting the creature's response to the barrier between us. He slipped his hands through the stems of the gate and flexed his fingers. He whined in frustration. We made it to the edge of the wood with a clear view of our victim. Our victim was and is precisely how we viewed him. He was an unwilling victim in this game we played to prove our power. We wanted to ingratiate ourselves to everyone we knew. We wanted everyone to know how necessary we were to their lives. Ellen sobbed as Martha and I decided what we were going to do next. Ellen's eyes never left the abomination. Suddenly, through the opening, there was a streak of black. In her mourning dress, the boy's mother ran toward the gate. Martha and I never missed a step as we dragged her to the ground. We covered her eyes in an attempt to spare her the horror of her son. As I screamed that this wasn't her son anymore, she broke free. The same suit she had dressed him in was hanging from his shoulders. His hair fell into his eyes as it had always done. It was her boy in her eyes. Nothing would change her mind. I finally allowed her to look at her boy. I kept a firm grip on her arm and let her look. A mixture of tears and laughter filled her voice. The creature turned to her and she reached for him. She was too close, and the corpse managed to grab her arm. The gate cut into her arm and she pulled to free herself. The scream penetrated my very heart as she managed to retract her arm. No sound escaped her, no tears fell. She simply turned from us and walked, dazed, back into the woods. Ellen's tears turned to rage. She raised her hands and started to chant. Martha lent our energy to her chant. We had no idea of the magic she invoked, but our trust lay in her. We believed her to be the strongest of the craft, even though she was the youngest. We asked nothing. Oh, we asked nothing. How I wish we had. The wind began to whip, and the very gate turned red from the scorching heat of the enchantment. Our energy was bound together like a knot. The thing fell to the ground and placed its hands over its ears. Its scream was that of rage. It bared its teeth in defiance. We grew louder and louder until our bodies lifted as one into the air. The last chant was clear and powerful. Our arms raised in unison toward the creature, and we sent all our power in his direction. A vibration was visible as it shattered the gate and the undead behind it. His corpse was reduced to ash as our bodies lowered to the ground. Ellen's body continued to crumble, and she lay motionless. Her slight frame held no life. There was no breath in her lungs, but the creature was no more. It had burned to cinders, and the wind carried its ashes to the corners of the earth. Unbelievably, we knew we could do nothing. We would have never tried. We laid her to rest up there under that willow tree. We wanted to be able to see her final resting place. We wanted to remember what pride will get ya. Rene said nothing as the story unfolded. Yet, as unbelievable as the tale seemed to be, she had no doubt that was exactly how it happened. Every word rang true, sad but true. The boy's mother, as we feared, never recovered. 1 month to the day, her husband found her hanging from the rafters of their hay barn, Martha said, finishing the tale. Over time, maybe grief would have been easier, but what we did had no healing time. So we owe you something, Ms. Rene. We can't grant you even a conversation with the dead, but that's not really why you're here anyway, is it? I mean, to the heart of it all, that's not it, is it? I hope you enjoyed the beginning of Rene's story, and I hope you will come back for more. Until next time, goodbye.